Hey, I'm Chris, and this is Game Chambers. Today we're going to do a bit of an intermission type episode. So we've been watching through my run through of Wrath of the Righteous, absolutely loving it. I thought I'd do a little bit of a comparison and a discussion of how the Owlcat Games has adapted it as compared to what you can see here, which is the original adventure path that we ran through back in. Looks like I downloaded this in 2013. So there's a few differences that Owlcat has made to the way the adventure runs, and it's also going to serve as a little bit of a refresher for myself. We get to see some of the cool artwork. I'm going to have a bit of a discussion about Emerylda because I've had a bit of feedback on her build, and yes, it's not a super effective build at this level, and I acknowledge that. So when I originally built her, I built her as a level 5 shaman, so at that point she had access to more spells, and because we were playing pen and paper Pathfinder, she also had access to lists of spells for Summon Nature's Ally. So Summon Nature's Ally was a far more effective spell than what it is at the moment. So summoning a Might is, for 2 rounds, is extremely useless. And that's used up a hex and a spell slot and 2 feats for her to accomplish that. So that is why she has been feeling extremely useless, I suppose is the correct word. To be effective, she probably should have picked up the Slumber Hex at the 2nd level. That way she could at least be knocking out enemies, and then we could be committing coup de grace on them, which could have been extremely effective. And for her feats, she could have picked up something like extra hex, or there might have been something else effective that we could have done. Spell Focus Conjuration is probably still a good choice. And she's going to need augment summoning at some point in her career. But let's not belabor too long on Emerylda. Let's have a look at some of the what's happening here through the adventure path. So this here was the prime NPCs for the adventure path, and you can see this book 1. The ones that have got artwork are the characters that are going to be key players in book 1. Now, we recognize Anevia Tirablade. She was one of the characters in the town before Canabras fell. She was also one of the ones that we found within the sunken tunnels, or the broken leg. And she is a Whirlwind Border Scout in the adventure with the NPCs, trapped with below Canabras, and yeah, she survives and does a few things with us. The other one we've met is Horgus Gwyrm, foul-tempered Canabras noble. I haven't played him that way. I've played him more as a gregarious, good-natured person, because that's how he's written up later in the book, or at least the Gwyrm family is written up as being gregarious and wealthy and forthcoming with their wealth. So I'm not sure why it's going foul-tempered. He is pretty racist. He doesn't like the mongrels and that sort of thing. Aravashnil. Now, we actually saw Aravashnil at the fair. I didn't really recognize him at the time. I did recognize the name, but didn't put 2 and 2 together. And during my playthrough, I didn't even notice. But when you find Camellia, the other shaman that's in the party, the one that's a little bit suspicious with all her going-ons, she's actually over Aravashnil's body when he's dead. And I suspect that she is potentially evil, perhaps even a demon in disguise or something of that nature, and she has killed Aravashnil. Now, in the adventure that I ran, Aravashnil ended up being quite a prominent character, and it was actually a mentor for a magus that was in our party, Lethalion. So he actually taught him different magics, helped him research his own spells as he advanced through those mythic levels, and was that research character that remained back in the city and was a good point of contact for the party when it came to matters of arcane that they might not have been able to quite do, or even if it was like more mundane magical research, they could send it to Aravashnil and he would do that research for them. So it's a bit disappointing from a personal point of view to see him killed off this early in the adventure, but I'm actually curious to see where Owlcat Games decides to go with Camellia. So they've obviously got a plan there. They've introduced a new character. We'll see what's going to happen. So Erebeth we haven't met, and we haven't met the rest of these yet in our current playthrough. So we'll zip down here a bit. Now this is the cover art, and this sort of shows what the start of the adventure path was like. And you can see this demon here is clearly not Discari. This is actually Karamzadeh, the Storm Tyrant. Storm Tyrant or the Storm King? We'll have a bit of a look in a second. And he is the one that attacks Canabras with his demonic horde, because Discari was not available. So we can actually zip down to the back cover where it has the Nemesis. You can see Karamzadeh is the ruler of Iz, and he's the one that has attacked Canabras. not Discari. If we look down here to see where Discari is, it says, with the destruction of the Wardstones, the introduction of mythic power from the Neandrian crystals, we haven't heard about those yet in this game, harvested from the Midnight Isles, and the aid of his numerous minions, Discari hopes to soon expand his influence far beyond the Worldwound's current border. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, he may not even be able to leave the Worldwound at this point in the adventure path. I'm not 100% sure, but he's definitely not as active as he has been in Owlcat's interpretation, which is absolutely fine. It's actually really cool to see them bring Discari forward. One thing that makes it a little bit awkward for someone that's played the adventure path is when you fall through the rifts. Now, the whole battle for Canabras happens pretty much as shown. The only difference is Terendelev gets more involved as a dragon flying and fighting demons in the air. And as the ground is splitting apart, she is in the air dueling and fighting these demons. And now when the party falls, it is actually Terendelev that casts that Featherfall spell on the party so they don't die. They believe it says that she gets some insight from Iomedae, and she realizes that this group of adventurers is going to become pivotal in saving the world and fighting, like sealing the Worldwound essentially. And she is inspired to cast Featherfall on them, and the party never sees Terendelev die in the original adventure path. Terendelev does die. Terendelev gets beheaded by Karamzadeh. He has a Vorpal sword. He kills the dragon, but they do not discover this until they escape from the underground. Now, let's have a bit of a look at some of the other things in here. So there's just a bit of artwork where Sealer and trying to rescue people from falling down. Now, I ran speaking of how I've run the adventure, when I did this scene, I always like my players to be rolling dice early on. So instead of having the whole city under attack be a passive storytelling affair where I just basically read a whole bunch of script to them and explain what's going on, I turned it into a skill challenge or a skill event where I would have the players tell me what they were going to do, throw a dice, and the degree of success or failure would determine whether they save someone, whether they fall down into the world, into the cracks earlier, whether they get more injured or not. A few different things. I don't remember the specifics of how I ran it. I ran it through Fantasy Grounds, actually. So I did that to try and make it a bit more exciting, get the players invested straight away in the game. It's not just them listening to a game master read them text. It's about them getting involved, telling me what their characters are doing, and that's what I try and do in all of my adventure paths. It's to me, role playing is collaborative storytelling. You want the players to try and input as much as possible. So if it's all about yes and they tell you they do something and you go yep cool, and then this happens, and that's what you should be doing at any point trying to role play. So what do we got here? We come a bit further down. Talks a little bit about the different NPCs. Now the Canabras Underground. It was actually here is the maps for it. So this was all just caverns that had mongrels living in it. And there was one cavern here, this Cavern of the Ancestors, which is where Owlcat has taken a lot of the inspiration for the shield maze from. So this Cavern of the Ancestors, if we look at is there any artwork of it? I don't think so. But there's this dwarven wizard in there that we don't actually ever meet. He may have been a corpse. I don't know, but basically the Cavern of the Ancestors gives us a bit of a description here. It was created by tainted First Crusaders that eventually became the mongrel tribes, which seems to be what Owlcat went with for that whole shield maze, and they brought the Baphomet cultists in, and it looks like the Baphomet cultists had been invested and sitting there for quite a while. You can see some of the sort of enemies that we had. We had Huekavers, we had Dark Mantle, so just your normal sort of underground stuff, cave vipers. The giant flies had a big part of Owlcat's interpretation, but there's no giant cockroaches. They had giant centipedes instead, giant maggots. So similar sort of giant vermin. And we didn't get Milorn, the dwarf wizard. Not sure why he was removed, but he probably just didn't really have anything to offer the Owlcat storyline. As they find the way up, they meet Land. So his artwork there is pretty accurate to how they've been shown him in Wrath of the Righteous, which is really cool. When the party meets him, he's actually trying to rescue another one of his companions. He's not a friend or even associated with the other mongrel, her name Gwenduag, at this point in time in the adventure. So she's actually later on. So it was nice to see them bring that forward to give evil parties an option to have an ally earlier on, because obviously this original adventure path is written from the point of view you're going to be the good guys. So there's not really a whole lot of option for going evil. If you were to do that, the Game Master would be making a lot of changes to it as they go along. So you can see there's Lan's artwork. He's actually a friendly guy, so they've actually got his personality very similar to how it is in here. The only difference is he's not willing to help the party in the original adventure path until the party helps him rescue his friend who's under collapsed rocks, which is fair enough. I think that might be where they got the collapsed rocks for Anevia from, and so they've brought that forward from this point just to give you that skill check within the game, and it's sort of a nice little call out to it. The underground traveling you can see is actually quite a lot here. If we just have a look at this line here, you end up traveling for 25 minutes of walking. So there's a fair bit of underground. Now, for Owlcat to have done that, they would have had to either have done like cutscenes with cuts in it, or actually just had long periods of empty corridors. When you're playing at pen and paper, it's easy to describe that. You're like, yep, you spend 25 minutes walking through this cave there with, the glowing moss and the slight smells and breezes, whatever else you decide to describe. Eventually, they find some dead cultists, and then they come to the town of Neathholm, which is very similar to how Owlcat has described it. So, and there's your Chief Soul, very similar again to how Owlcat's done. So this area has all been pretty good. Now, Chief Soul actually has a few different things in here going on. There is a shop, just like in Owlcat's interpretation. Horgus and Anevia are actually with the party, along with Aravashnil at this point, so they're following along, whereas we only had Anevia following us, whereas we met Horgus at Neathholm, and as we already mentioned, Aravashnil was dead. Now, I don't really recall how my party interacted with the mongrels. It's been a little while. The party was a Asthma paladin. We had an elven magus. We had a human scion, a dark elf ninja, and I think the final character was a human cleric of Desna. So they were a very good oriented party. Even the drow was actually a chaotic good drow, not based on everyone's favorite Forgotten Realms drow, as the player didn't even know about Dristoerden at the time, but he definitely shared some similarities with him. There's a bit of description of the town of Neathholm. Now, this part 2, Lair of the Vile and the Vicious, is sort of what the Shield Maze was inspired from. So they took the Cabin of the Ancestors from part 1, and they've combined it with the Lair of the Vile and the Vicious in part 2 to make the Shield Maze that Owlcat has put into the actual computer RPG, which is a really cool thing. I actually really liked the Shield Maze. I did have a few issues with the challenge rating of some of the creatures in there, but they've probably designed it to work at their normal difficulty, and it's not tuned for running it at core rules difficulty, because throwing level 5 challenges at a level 2 party back to back without rest is actually quite dangerous. But they have allowed you to rest and save, so that does mitigate the luck, and it also mitigates the use of the resources, because you've got essentially unlimited time to keep resting between each encounter. Not a fan of it. I don't generally allow players to sleep in a dungeon. If they try and sleep in the dungeon, they'll probably come under attack. So the dungeon should be alive. Things aren't going to stay in their rooms. They will patrol. If they don't, they'll swap shifts. They'll move around. They will discover a sleeping party. If you pull out sleeping bags in the middle of the Shield Maze, for instance, those cultists are going to find you. There's no way you're going to get a full 8 hours rest or 12 hours rest, or however long you need for your party to fully replenish. So not a fan of that, but it works mechanically for the game. Now you can see the challenge rating of the stuff in this place. We're looking at challenge rating 1, mongrel, and again, mongrel, challenge rating 1, a couple of monitor lizards, challenge rating 2. I think that's all by itself actually, but it's in the pantry. So they actually kept the monitor lizards. They were in Owlcat's interpretation. And Wenduag is here as the guard to the front of what they call it, sorry, the Lair of the Vile and the Vicious. So she's here. She's a ranger, not a fighter, and she basically just attacks, you see here, obvious worshippers of good deities. Now this comes up a lot in this adventure path, and I like to play things as close to the rules as I can, and I will play the dice as they lie. So this has actually gotten a couple of characters killed, and it actually did get characters killed in this adventure path. But this line here, where you're attacking obvious worshippers of good deities, we had a heavily armored paladin of Iomedae wielding a shield with the emblem of Iomedae plastered on top, built fully to tank, essentially. Normally, tanking in Pathfinder doesn't work the same way as you would expect in a computer game. Monsters are smart. However, as soon as that line is in there, well, that monster's no longer smart. He wants to kill that paladin of Iomedae, and normally they can't. I can see here a couple of enemies that didn't show up. We got a giant amoeba. There's no sign of that, but we had a water elemental instead in the trash pit. More mongrel and traders, they were everywhere, but you can see these are just challenge rating 1, 15 hit point enemies. They are nothing to a party of adventurers. They're nothing like the challenge rating 5 barbarians that we ran into in Owlcat's interpretation of the game. Here's a bit of a map. You can see it's more of a lair, a mongrel lair. There's a couple of secret passageways in it, or two secret passageways, secret rooms. It's a little bit of more like a cave system with a bit of a maze at the end. So I'm guessing that this maze is where they were inspired by the shield maze name for the place. But there wasn't really a maze involved in the Owlcat version. And I think I appreciate that. Mazes don't really work in isometric games very well. But yeah, there's the map of what they call the mongrel lair. More traders in it. And Hosilla was actually over the back here. So the party comes in this way and they want to get out this way. They could potentially never even face Hosilla, but most players will clear a whole area, and my party did. And in here, she was a 3rd level Inquisitor of Baphomet. And now I believe, I don't remember 100%, but I think she was a 5th level Inquisitor in Owlcat's interpretation, which is fine. 5th level against a 2nd level party, that's a good challenge for a boss fight. I don't know if she had anything different. I think her glaive in here is just a normal glaive, or it's just a +1 glaive. So they actually gave her a unique weapon in Owlcat's interpretation, which is pretty cool. The more unique weapons, the better. And you see her stats there are probably very different to the game version. And again, we've got this line here, favors attacks against foes who are obvious worshippers of good deities. Now, my paladin player absolutely loved this because he wanted to go sword and board, he wanted to go tanky. Normally that's an issue because it's hard to control an area, you don't have reach, you don't really have much threat except when your smite's up. But as soon as that's in there, your cultists are going for you, even your bosses are going for you. So it worked extremely well for him. Yeah, she had a tiefling guard. We didn't see any tieflings in the Owlcat version, but they did bring cambions in. So cambions I don't think are in this part of the dungeon, but they are definitely introduced in this adventure path. So bringing them in felt natural, and they do fit. There is a letter there from the demon that we see visibly in Owlcat's version, so you never actually get to meet that demon. I'm blanking on its name. I'm sure it'll be in here somewhere. I'm not seeing it. I'm sure if you're interested, you can go back and have a look through the other one, but the other video and see his name again. SV. Do not remember. But this is where the party finds Radiance in a lockbox. So Radiance also is a little bit different in here as well. So it's not just a simple cold iron longsword. So I'm thinking Owlcat is got it set up to be worked on and grow with the paladins as you go. In this case, it does grow and get more powerful as you go as well. But as soon as a paladin picks it up, it turns into a +1 longsword. So we'll have a look at that in a little bit of a second. See if there's anything else interesting in here. Well, there's our cultist. So you can see their standard cultist was a cleric 1, fighter 1. They kind of split the cultists into cleric 1s or fighter 1s, and they even had rangers as well for Owlcat. So there's a little bit of a difference there. We didn't see any Gars at all. I don't recall any pit traps. There was a couple of traps, so mostly burning hand traps. And we only triggered one of them, I think. It was a rat's nest. We didn't have to deal with a rat's nest. And the dretches. So This was the maze at the end of the dungeon. In Owlcat's version, it was just a summoning circle with the dretches in it. So, and that's where we fought the dretches, and they are they were actually quite frustrating for my party in some situations because that stinking cloud that they put down can basically, one failed save can shut down a character until they get out of the cloud and recover. It's really quite nasty. So the saving throw is quite low. So most of the time you're going to pass it, but when you fail it, it completely shuts your character down. I believe it shuts them down to only being able to take a move action, and you basically just got to get out of the stinking cloud to get back into play. As a matter of Canabris, we haven't gone back yet, but you can see the underground tunnels actually are quite extensive in the original adventure path. It feels like in Owlcat's version, we've basically just stayed underneath the fairgrounds. It doesn't feel like we've gone very far at all. Amid the Ruins is part 3, so that's going to be the next part of the adventure. Now we're just going to skip to the back, the appendix, and just have a bit of a look. There's Anevia, so let's have a look at her artwork. Looks pretty accurate. They've pretty much gone straight for how Anevia looks. Aravashnil, so he got blinded in the original adventure, but he just ends up being a corpse on the ground, which is a bit of a shame. I quite liked him. He was a very powerful wizard. You can see he starts off as a Conjurer 5, Rift Warden 1, so by the end of our adventure he was not quite mythic, but he was definitely up there in the power levels. Horgus in there, and Erebeth we haven't met yet. Now, the treasures, this is where we haven't found a couple of things, but we have found Radiance. And you can see they've gone pretty faithful to the art. They've kept the gold look, but they've just made it a little bit more stylized. Obviously, this is just a very basic piece of artwork, so I'm glad Owlcat decided to really build on that. You can see here, it gives us a description on what it is. So when it's handled by a paladin, it becomes a +1 cold iron longsword that radiates light. And it shifts to become whatever the paladin's deity's favored weapon is. So I don't know if that's the happens in Owlcat's version, because Sealer is a paladin of Amade. Amade's favored weapon's a longsword, so if it's going to be a longsword, it's going to stay a longsword. And you can see here it's telling us that it will eventually turn into a fully fledged Holy Avenger. So it is a mythic item, a legendary item that can bond with a mythic paladin. So I don't believe the NPCs in this will become mythic. In the original adventure path, every player character became mythic. So I think only the player character becomes mythic in this Owlcat version. So we'll wait and see. We'll see how that goes there. I don't think any of these other things. Oh, yep, Terendilith scales. We did find some of Terendilith scales, but they do very different things. So the ones that you find in this adventure give you Cloudwalking, Disguise, Resistance, and Sacred Weapons. The ones that we found in Owlcat's version let you use Raise Dead, and we already used one because we lost Camellia in that water elemental fight. And I probably shouldn't have wasted a Resurrect on her. I should have probably loaded, but there comes a point where you just got to accept your failures and move on, and I don't like save scumming when I succeed, even if it's a bad success. So I'm happy that I kept going with that. So there you have it. I don't think there's anything in the bestiary that's any different. No, so there's nothing in there worth looking at. Cool. Well, so that's the differences between the Owlcat version and the original adventure path. Like I said, I'm really enjoying the way Owlcat has interpreted it. Our party went through this section with minimal issues, I believe. I think our cleric may have struggled a little bit. He was using an oversized crossbow at the time, and I think he might have struggled with the to-hit bonus. Oversized crossbow gives you like a -2 to your attack rolls, and he was a cleric, so it was already a +0, so he was pretty much struggling to land shots, but when he did, he's packing quite a bit of a punch, so the increased size of the crossbow gives you increased damage. But there you go. So thanks for sitting with me with this little discussion about the differences. I am going to now go and fire it up and move on to the next part. I'm interested to see how Owlcat has handled the next section. So Amid the Ruins is what it's called in this book here. And it's going to be interesting to see what it's like in the Owlcat interpretation. So I don't want to read it. I'm trying to go in relatively fresh, even though I ran the adventure. It was a good 8 or 9 years ago. I don't remember it that clearly, and obviously Owlcat has done things differently. So if you like this little interlude, you want to see me discuss something else as I go through, maybe go into more depth in my old party, any sort of GM tips. If you want to see some of my actual notes or prep for the adventure, I could fire up Fantasy Grounds and bring that up as well. But otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and we'll talk to you again soon.